The desert wind carried the smell of blood and incense. The sound of iron clashing against iron echoed in the streets of Jerusalem. Pilgrims prayed with trembling voices while soldiers screamed in foreign tongues. And in the middle of this chaos, something new was about to be born. A brotherhood, a vow, a fire that would burn across centuries. This was the moment when the Knights Templar first stepped into history, not as legends, not as myths, but as desperate men in a desperate land. Close your eyes and imagine the Holy Land in the year 1119. The Crusades had torn it apart. Christian knights from Europe marched thousands of miles across deserts, carrying crosses on their shields and fear in their hearts. Muslim warriors fought with the same devotion, protecting their cities, their families, their holy places. The air itself seemed heavy with the clash of faiths. Jerusalem was no longer just a city. It was the beating heart of the world, and everyone wanted to claim it. The city smelled of smoke and sweat. Pilgrims poured in through the gates, many barefoot, many broken from the journey. They came to see the places where Christ had walked, where prophets had spoken, where the divine had touched the earth. But the journey to get here was no peaceful walk. Bandits haunted the roads, raiders struck without mercy. For every pilgrim who made it, another lay dead on the roadside. And so, from this storm of danger, a small band of knights rose up. They were not kings. They were not rich men. They called themselves the poor knights of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. 9 men. That was all. 9 knights who made a vow to protect the pilgrims of Jerusalem. They swore poverty. They swore chastity. They swore obedience. But above all, they swore to fight. Picture them now. Weary, scarred, their armor dented and dusty. They did not live in palaces. They lived in the ruins near the old Temple of Solomon. That is how they became known as Templars. Their home was not made of gold, but of broken stone. Yet inside their hearts burned something greater than any fortress: faith, discipline, and the will to stand between the helpless and the blade. The Holy Land at that time was like a battlefield with no walls. Every sound carried danger. The clatter of hooves could mean raiders. A shadow moving in the hills could mean an ambush. The pilgrims were terrified. But when they saw the Templars, riding with white cloaks marked by a red cross, hope returned. These men had nothing, but they gave everything. The idea of the Templars spread quickly. Whispers carried through the markets and into the courts of kings. "There are knights in Jerusalem," people said, "who have given up wealth and glory, who fight only for God and for the poor." It was a story so strange that it caught the ear of the most powerful man in Christendom. The Pope himself in 1129. The Council of Troyes gathered to decide the fate of these 9 knights. They were questioned, doubted, tested. Could they truly live by such vows? Could warriors truly be monks? One man defended them with fiery words. Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most respected holy men of the age. He said the Templars were the answer to a world drowning in sin and violence. They were, in his words, a new kind of knighthood. From that moment, everything changed. The Templars were no longer just a small band. They became an official order of the Church. Their numbers swelled. Men from across Europe abandoned castles and fortunes to wear the white mantle and bear the red cross. Kings gave them land. Lords gave them coin. The poor gave them prayers. But let's step back for a moment. Imagine the daily life of those first Templars in Jerusalem. Dawn would rise over the golden stones of the city. The call to prayer of the Muslims would echo from one side, while church bells rang from another. The streets smelled of dust, bread baking in clay ovens, and animals packed too tightly in the markets. And in the midst of it all, the Templars trained. Sword drills in the blazing heat, prayers whispered before riding out to guard the roads, nights spent in silence, broken only by the rustle of armor being strapped on for patrol. They did not seek riches. In fact, they were forbidden to even own personal possessions beyond what was needed to fight. Their horses, their swords, their cloaks, these were not theirs, but the order's. Every Templar, whether a nobleman or a peasant before joining, was now equal. They ate together. They fought together. They died together. The Holy Land tested them at every turn. Sandstorms blinded their eyes. Heat cracked their lips. Ambushes from desert raiders cut down their brothers. But every challenge seemed only to strengthen their resolve. The pilgrims, once trembling in fear, now walked with a little more courage, knowing Templars rode ahead. And with every battle won, with every life saved, their reputation grew. To some they were holy warriors. To others they were fanatics. But to the pilgrims who survived their journeys, they were angels of steel. Slowly their influence began to stretch beyond Jerusalem. Word of the Templars spread across Europe. Songs were sung about them. Noble families sent their sons to join them. Even kings began to see them not just as protectors of pilgrims, but as protectors of Christendom itself. The small band of 9 had planted a seed, and that seed was growing into something vast. But in those early years they were still fragile. They had enemies in every shadow. Bandits and raiders wanted them dead. Rival lords envied their growing power. Even priests whispered that these warrior monks were too strange, too dangerous, too different from the world they claimed to serve. One mistake, one disaster, and their order could vanish before it even began. Yet destiny had chosen them, and in the fire of the Holy Land they were being forged into legends. As we stand with them now, in those first years after their birth, we can almost hear the hoofbeats on the stony road, the sharp clang of their swords in training, the murmured prayers before dawn. The Templars were still few, still uncertain, still poor. But they were not afraid, because deep down they believed they were part of something greater than themselves. They were not just knights, they were guardians of the sacred, chosen to defend the holiest city on earth, with nothing to guide them but faith and a red cross stitched onto a white cloak. And though none of them could have known it at the time, the choices they made in those early days, their vows, their battles, their sacrifices would set the stage for one of the most powerful, mysterious, and feared brotherhoods the world has ever seen. The story of the Knights Templar was only beginning. And in the next chapter, we will see how these poor Knights of Christ transformed from a small group in Jerusalem into a force so mighty. Kings and popes would bow to them, and enemies would whisper their name in fear. The streets of Jerusalem were not silent. They rang with the cries of merchants, the clatter of hooves, and the whispers of fear. But in one corner of the city, inside the crumbling ruins near the ancient Temple of Solomon, a new brotherhood lived in silence. They had no gold, no castles, and no armies. Just 9 men, worn and scarred, who called themselves the poor Knights of Christ. They were not kings. They were not rich lords. They were soldiers who had stripped themselves of everything wealth, pride, comfort, because they believed they had been chosen. Imagine this scene. A small stone hall lit by flickering torches, the air thick with the smell of sweat, dust, and candle wax. 9 knights kneel on the cold floor. Their armor is patched and dented. Their cloaks are ragged. Yet each man bows his head, whispering the same vow, to live poor, to live pure, to live obedient, to fight not for themselves, but for God and for the pilgrims who walk the dangerous roads of the Holy Land. This vow was radical. Knights in Europe usually lived for glory, honor, and wealth. They wore gold-embroidered cloaks, held lavish feasts, and rode into battle to win fame. But these 9 knights gave all of that away. They lived on donations of bread and cheese. They owned no property, no wives, no luxuries. Each horse, each sword, even each cloak, they did not belong to the man, but to the brotherhood. They called themselves poor because they wanted the world to see. They had nothing but faith and steel, and the world did notice. The pilgrims who traveled to Jerusalem spread stories of these strange warrior monks. Travelers spoke of knights who looked like beggars but fought like lions. Word reached Europe of these poor knights who lived in the shadow of Solomon's temple, and slowly people began to ask, "Who are these men?" Let us step closer. Watch as they walk through the narrow alleys of Jerusalem. Children follow them, curious at their plain cloaks. Merchants shake their heads, wondering why any man would choose such poverty. But others whisper in awe, "These men do not chase gold. They do not hunger for crowns. They hunger for sacrifice." And that made them dangerous. At night, the brotherhood would gather in prayer. The halls were quiet, except for the rustle of cloth and the creak of armor being set aside. Their prayers were not for themselves. They prayed for the pilgrims crossing deserts. They prayed for the souls who had died on the roads. They prayed for strength to fight, even if no one remembered their names. Day after day they trained in silence. The clang of wooden swords echoed in the courtyard. Sweat poured down their faces as they drilled under the blazing sun. Every swing, every strike, every shield raised was not for personal glory, but for the weak who could not protect themselves. But beyond their vows, what made the poor knights of Christ so remarkable was their brotherhood. A knight who joined the order gave up his past. It did not matter if he had been a noble or a farmer, a rich man or a pauper. Once he put on the white cloak, he was equal to his brothers. They ate together, slept together, fought together. No man was greater than another. Their leader was called the Master, but even he obeyed the same vows of poverty and service. Still, their poverty was no act. They truly had nothing. There are records of Templars owning only 2 tunics each, so one could be washed while the other was worn. Some knights even had to share a horse between 2 men. They were mocked for it. Other knights laughed at them, calling them beggars. But that mockery only made their legend grow stronger, because the pilgrims knew the poor knights of Christ were not beggars. They were guardians. Let's picture one of their missions. A caravan of pilgrims leaves Jerusalem at dawn. Old men, with walking sticks, women carrying children, priests chanting prayers. Fear hangs over them, because the roads ahead are cursed with bandits and raiders. Then, From the gates 9 knights ride out. Their white cloaks flutter in the wind. The pilgrims cheer, hope rising in their hearts. For on these roads even 9 poor knights are worth an army, and when the attack comes, as it always does it, is the Templars who charge first. Shields up, swords flashing, horses pounding the earth. They do not fight for loot. They do not fight for crowns. They fight for the helpless, and they fight without fear. Many times they fought outnumbered. Many times they bled and fell. But each time their courage left pilgrims alive who otherwise would have been slaughtered. The word of these acts traveled fast. To the poor, the Templars were heroes. To the rich, they were a mystery. To kings and bishops, they were something far more valuable. Proof that knights could be holy. Proof that war could serve God. And this caught the attention of the most powerful man in Christendom, the Pope. But before the Pope, there was a voice that carried even more weight in the Church. A man named Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard was a fiery preacher, a man whose words could move crowds to tears. When he heard of the Templars, he saw not just knights, but a miracle. He called them a new knighthood. Unlike the old knights, who fought for greed, these knights fought with pure devotion. And Bernard believed the world needed them. With his blessing, the Templars gained protection. Soon, at the Council of Troyes in 1129, the Church officially recognized them as an order. The poor Knights of Christ were no longer just 9 men in Jerusalem. They were a brotherhood with the full power of the Church behind them. But here's the irony. Though they were poor, their poverty became their strength. Because when lords and kings across Europe heard of them, they were moved. They sent donations, land and treasure. They trusted the Templars because the knights themselves owned nothing. All wealth was given to the order, never to individuals. And so, without meaning to, the poor Knights of Christ began to grow rich in ways they had sworn to avoid. But in these early days, before the gold and before the power, the heart of the Templars was still pure sacrifice. Their identity was not forged in wealth or legend, but in dust, blood, and prayer. The world looked at them with wonder, fear, and sometimes suspicion. But for the pilgrims on the road, the sight of a Templar cloak meant life. Now let us return once more to that small stone hall in Jerusalem. The torches flicker, the 9 kneel in silence, their vows still fresh on their lips. Outside, the city is alive with chaos. But inside, a new force is being born, not just knights, not just monks, something in between, something the world had never seen before. And though the years ahead would carry them into battlefields, castles, and even courts of kings, these men would always remember how it began with 9 poor knights kneeling in the shadows of Solomon's temple. This was the foundation of the Templars. This was their sole dot, and in the next chapter we will see how these humble guardians of pilgrims became warriors feared across the Holy Land, their red cross a symbol of both hope and terror. The road was death. It twisted through barren hills where shadows held knives. It cut across deserts where the sun burned flesh like fire. It wound into valleys where ambush waited, silent and merciless. For pilgrims coming to Jerusalem, every step was a gamble with fate. To walk the road was to risk your life. And yet men and women kept coming, barefoot and bleeding, drawn by faith stronger than fear. They carried nothing but hope in their hearts and prayers on their lips. And then out of the dust riders appeared, cloaks of white marked with a blood-red cross, swords flashing in the sunlight, horses pounding like thunder across the stones. They came not for gold, not for glory, but for the helpless souls who could not defend themselves. These were the Knights Templar, the guardians of the Pilgrim's Road. Close your eyes and see it. Dawn breaking over the hills of the Holy Land. The air is cool for only a moment before the desert heat swallows it whole. A group of pilgrims, men, women, children, begin their journey. The smell of dry earth and sweat clings to them. Their sandals kick up dust. Their voices are low with nervous prayer. Every crack of a branch, every bird suddenly taking flight, makes them flinch. They know the stories. Caravans robbed, families slaughtered, bodies left to rot on the roadside. The road is haunted, not by spirits, but by men who have no mercy. And then from the ridge comes the sound, hoofbeats. At first the pilgrims freeze in terror. Bandits, they think, raiders. But soon they see the glint of steel, the flutter of white cloaks. The red cross shines bright. The fear in their eyes fades. Relief floods their faces. The guardians have come. The Templars were not many, but their presence was like fire in the dark. They rode ahead of pilgrim groups, scanning the hills. They rode behind, shields ready. They flanked the travelers, watching every shadow. And when the attack came, as it always did, they charged without hesitation. Imagine the sudden clash. Arrows whistling through the air, the scream of a horse pierced by a shaft, the roar of raiders rushing from behind rocks, blades flashing, and then the countercharge. Templars slamming into the ambush like a storm, steel striking steel. The smell of blood and dust, the cries of pilgrims praying while the knights fought for their lives. The bandits expected easy prey. Instead they met the fury of men who feared nothing. The Templars fought differently from other knights. They were not showmen. They did not waste time on duels for honor or pride. Their strikes were clean, brutal, efficient. Their goal was not to prove themselves. Their goal was simple: protect the weak. And for the pilgrims, this was more than protection. It was salvation. Now step into the mind of a pilgrim, a man who has walked hundreds of miles, blistered feet bleeding, eyes hollow from hunger. He knows he may die on this road. And then he sees a Templar knight, sitting tall on his horse, face hidden by a steel helm, cloak whipping in the wind. To him, that knight is not just a man. He is a symbol, a promise, that someone at last will stand between him and the blade. It is no wonder that stories of the Templars spread like wildfire. Pilgrims who returned home told tales of the guardians of the road. We would have died, they said, but the knights came. They rode out of the dust like angels. These stories reached Europe, across castles and villages, and even into the halls of kings. The reputation of the Templars grew not because of wealth or conquest, but because of their simple, relentless service to the helpless. But make no mistake, this service was brutal. The Holy Land was no gentle place. The Templars faced ambush after ambush, often outnumbered. There were days when half a patrol never returned. There were nights when bodies were carried back to Jerusalem, armor broken, faces pale under the moonlight. Their vow of poverty and chastity was hard enough. but their vow to fight until death, that was the heaviest of all. Still, the brotherhood held strong. Their discipline was legendary. A Templar did not fight for himself. He fought as part of a living wall. Side by side, shield to shield, they charged as one, retreated as one, lived and died as one. And this unity made them terrifying to their enemies. Bandits who once preyed freely on pilgrims now began to think twice. Whispers spread among raiders. If you strike the road, beware. The white cloaks may be near. Even armies began to fear their sudden charges. 9 knights, 10 knights, sometimes 20, could scatter enemies far greater in number. Not because of strength alone, but because of faith. For the Templars, death was not an end. It was a passage. They believed every battle was fought under the eyes of God, and so they rode with a fearlessness that unnerved their foes. How do you fight men who do not fear death? How do you stop warriors who believe that every sword stroke is holy? And yet there was something human beneath the steel. After battles, when the dust settled, when the dead were counted, the Templars often knelt in silence. They prayed for their fallen brothers. They prayed even for the souls of their enemies. To the pilgrims, this was a strange sight. Warriors covered in blood, kneeling like monks, lips moving in quiet prayer. It was this blend sword and scripture, battle and prayer, that made them so mysterious. The road itself began to change. Where once pilgrims traveled in terror, now they walked with hope. Markets reopened along the way. Inns began to rise where once only fear stood. The presence of the Templars turned the path from a graveyard into a lifeline, and the people began to see these knights were not just soldiers. They were guardians of a dream, the dream that ordinary men and women could walk to Jerusalem and live. But with fame came questions. Some priests wondered if warrior monks were truly holy. Some lords feared the growing power of this order. And in Europe, whispers began of the treasure and influence these poor knights might gather. For now, though, the Templars' focus was pure. The road, the pilgrims, the vow. Let us pause and see it one last time. The sun setting over the rocky hills. A caravan of pilgrims moving slowly, torches flickering in the dark. At their sides ride the Templars. Their cloaks ripple, their swords gleam faintly in the dying light. A child looks up at one of them, eyes wide with awe. The knight does not speak. He only nods, silent and steady. For to him this is not glory. This is duty. The guardians of the road were not saints. They were not angels. They were men with fears and doubts, with wounds and scars. But through their vow they became something greater. They became a shield for the helpless. And in doing so, they carved their place in history, because it was here, on the dusty roads of the Holy Land, that the Knights Templar proved their worth. It was here that their legend began to rise. And in the next chapter, we will see how that legend caught the attention of kings and popes, transforming 9 poor knights into an unstoppable force, sealed by the symbol that would define them forever, the seal of the temple. The hall was silent. Candles flickered against stone walls. The air smelled of wax and incense. A line of knights, cloaked in white with red crosses upon their chests, knelt on the cold floor. Above them, bishops and priests looked on with stern eyes. The year was 1129, and history was about to be written. What had once been only 9 poor knights living in the ruins of Solomon's temple was about to become something far greater. They were about to receive the blessing that would transform them from a fragile brotherhood into a force that no king, no army, and no enemy could ignore. This was the moment the Knights Templar were officially sealed by the Church, and with that seal, the seal of the temple, their destiny changed forever. Close your eyes and imagine it. A medieval council gathered in the small French town of Troyes. The winter wind howled outside, rattling shutters, carrying with it the smell of wood smoke. Inside the council chamber, long wooden tables were crowded with parchment, quills, and men in heavy robes. Cardinals, bishops, abbots, all of them debating, all of them whispering. Could knights truly be monks? Could warriors also be servants of God? Some called it blasphemy. Others called it genius. At the heart of this debate stood the 9 poor knights of Jerusalem. They did not look like kings or conquerors. They were scarred, thin, their armor plain and dented from years of battle on the pilgrim roads. Yet they stood with a quiet dignity, waiting for their fate to be decided. And then a voice rose above the noise. Bernard of Clairvaux, the most powerful preacher of the age, a man whose words could move entire nations. He defended the Templars with passion. He said they were not ordinary knights, they were a new kind of knighthood. They did not fight for land or for crowns, but for Christ himself. To Bernard they were proof that faith and steel could live as one. His speech burned through the chamber like fire, and slowly the resistance began to crumble. At last, the Church gave its verdict. The knights would be recognized. They would become an official religious order, protected by the Pope. No king could command them. No bishop could control them. Their loyalty would be to God alone. This moment was their birth in the eyes of the world, and with it came their symbol, the seal of the temple. Now, picture the seal itself, simple yet powerful. 2 knights riding on a single horse. To some it meant poverty, that the order was so poor 2 men had to share 1 horse. To others it symbolized brotherhood, unity, and sacrifice. No knight would ever ride alone. Whatever the meaning, the seal carried a message that echoed. Across Christendom, the Templars were bound together, humble yet unbreakable. That seal appeared everywhere, stamped on letters, carved into stone, pressed into wax that sealed their commands. It was more than an image, it was a promise. Wherever it was seen, men knew the Templars stood behind it. And when kings and lords saw that seal, they knew these knights carried not only swords, but the authority of the Church. With recognition came rules. A code was written, called the Latin Rule. It laid out every part of a Templar's life. They were to eat simply, often in silence. They were to wear plain clothes, nothing decorated or colorful. They were forbidden to hunt, to gamble, or to boast. Their hair was cut short, their beards kept long. Their days were divided between prayer, training, and service. Even their beds were plain wooden planks. Every detail was designed to strip away pride and bind them tighter to the order. This discipline became the core of their strength. For while other knights feasted and boasted, the Templars remained focused. While others fought for personal glory, the Templars fought as one. This unity, enforced by their vows and their rule, made them unlike any army Europe had ever seen. And yet their poverty was deceptive, because once the Pope's seal fell upon them, donations began to pour in. Lords gave land, kings gave treasure, merchants left gifts of coin, peasants offered food and livestock. To give to the Templars was to give to God himself. Soon the poor knights were building commanderies across Europe, farms and estates that supplied them with wealth not for themselves, but for the order. Still, in these early years, the heart of the Templars remained tied to their seal, the image of two men on one horse. It reminded them of where they had begun, 9 poor knights in a ruined hall, and it reminded the world that even the humblest of beginnings could rise into power when bound by faith. But let us step back for a moment. Imagine the first time a pilgrim held a letter sealed by the Templars. The wax was marked with that strange image of 2 knights sharing a horse. To that pilgrim, it was more than a symbol. It was protection. It meant that he could travel the dangerous roads under the watchful eyes of men who had sworn to die for him if needed. Or picture a nobleman in Europe holding the same seal. He would see in it both simplicity and strength. To donate land to the Templars, to wear their red cross in battle, was to join a cause larger than himself. And so the order grew. What had been 9 men became dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. The seal of the temple was their banner, their identity, their calling card. It was whispered about in markets, sung about in songs, carried across seas. And with that seal came fear. For enemies of Christendom, the red cross and the seal meant one thing: resistance. Relentless, disciplined, unbreakable resistance. Raiders. And armies alike began to dread the sight of the Templar cloak. They knew these were not ordinary knights. They fought with the blessing of the Church, with the seal of the temple upon their letters, their armor, and their hearts. But as the order grew, so too did its power. And with power came questions. Who could command men who answered only to the Pope? Who could stop an army that lived by its own laws, bound not by kings but by vows? Some feared them. Others envied them. Already the first shadows of suspicion began to gather. Yet, for now the Templar's star was rising. Their seal had opened the doors of Europe. Their rule had bound them together, and their reputation was spreading like wildfire. The poor knights were no longer poor. They were becoming the sword and shield of Christendom. So let us return one last time to that council chamber in Troyes. The knights kneel as the verdict is read. The Pope's blessing falls like a crown upon their bowed heads. A scribe presses the new seal into hot wax. The sound of it cracking against parchment is small, almost invisible. But that sound carries across centuries, because in that moment a brotherhood became an institution, a fragile vow became a law, and 9 poor knights became the Templars, the guardians not only of roads and pilgrims, but of Christendom itself. Seal of the temple was more than a mark. It was destiny pressed in wax. And in the next chapter, we will see how this destiny led them from council halls and prayers into the chaos of battlefields, where their red cross would be stained with blood, and their legend would be forged in fire, blood, and cross in battle. The battlefield was chaos. Smoke curled in the air. Horses screamed. Steel clashed against steel. Dust and blood filled every breath. In the heart of this storm rode men in white cloaks marked by a blood-red cross. They did not flinch. They did not flee. They lowered their lances, spurred their horses, and charged straight into death. To their enemies they looked like ghosts. To their allies they were angels in armor. And to history they would become something more, symbols of holy war. This was the Knights Templar in battle, where blood and cross became one. Close your eyes and picture the Holy Land in the 12th century. The sun was merciless, a blazing furnace over sand and stone. Armies marched beneath banners of gold and green, red and white, chanting prayers in different tongues. On one side, Muslim warriors fought with skill and faith to defend their lands. On the other, Crusader armies came from every corner of Europe, hungry to claim the city of God, and riding at the front of those Crusader lines, always at the tip of the spear, were the Templars. The rule of the Templars was clear. They never retreated. To flee was to dishonor God. They were bound by oath to hold the line, even when the line was collapsing. Imagine what that meant in battle. Other knights might waver. Mercenaries might break and run. But when the Templars planted their red cross banner, they stood until the last man fell. This was not courage alone. It was discipline, drilled into them through endless training, and faith, hammered into their souls through endless prayer. Their tactics were brutal and simple. The Templars were shock troops. They fought in tight formations, shields locked, lances lowered. When the order came, they thundered forward in unison. Horses shook the ground. The sound of their charge was like an earthquake. Few enemies could withstand that first impact. Spears shattered. Men were thrown aside. And in the chaos, the Templars drew their swords, cutting through the enemy ranks with terrifying precision. But this was no game of chivalry. The battles of the Holy Land were savage. The heat choked the breath. Blood darkened the sand. Arrows fell like rain. The smell of iron and death lingered long after the fighting ended. And in the center of it all, the Templars fought, not as individuals, but as one living weapon. To understand their mindset, step into the mind of a Templar before battle. Dawn rises, painting the desert sky in red and gold. He kneels in prayer, whispering psalms as his brothers kneel beside him. His cloak is simple, his armor battered. He has confessed his sins. He has eaten his bread and drunk his wine. He knows that today may be his last day on earth, and yet he does not tremble, because he believes that if he dies with the red cross upon his chest, he dies in the service of Christ. Death to him is not an ending, but a passage. This faith made them terrifying opponents. Muslim chroniclers, who admired courage above all, wrote with respect and fear of the Templars' refusal to surrender. Time and again, armies found themselves locked in battle with men who seemed to fight beyond exhaustion, beyond reason, beyond life itself. One famous example came at the Battle of Montgisard in 1177. The Christian king, Baldwin IV of Jerusalem, a boy stricken with leprosy, faced the mighty army of Saladin. Baldwin had only a few hundred knights, hopelessly outnumbered, but riding with him were the Templars. They charged Saladin's army with such fury that the larger force broke apart in panic. Against all odds, the Christians won. The chroniclers recorded that Saladin himself barely escaped, his pride wounded as deeply as his army. And at the center of that miracle stood the Red Cross Knights. But victories came at a heavy cost. The Templars were often the first to charge and the first to fall. Entire units of them were wiped out in single battles. At Hattin in 1187, where Saladin finally crushed the Crusader armies, the Templars fought until their horses were cut down beneath them, until their swords broke in their hands. Captured Templars were executed on Saladin's orders, because he knew they would never serve him, never betray their vow. Their faith made them unstoppable in battle and unyielding. In death dot to the people of Europe, news of these battles spread like wildfire. Pilgrims returned home with tales of the Red Cross Knights, who charged into armies twice their size. Priests preached sermons of their sacrifice. Songs were sung in taverns and churches alike. The Templars were no longer just protectors of roads. They had become the hammer of Christendom, the holy warriors who carried the cross into the heart of war. Yet the reality was not as glorious as the stories. Life as a Templar soldier was harsh. The sun blistered their skin. The desert nights froze their bones. Their armor grew heavy with dust and blood. They lived with wounds that never healed. They watched their brothers fall beside them, again and again, but they endured, because their vow demanded it. Their symbol, the Red Cross, was more than decoration. It was a reminder. Every time a Templar lifted his sword, he carried the image of sacrifice. The cross meant he no longer fought for himself. His life was already given away, his blood already promised. It was this fusion of symbol and reality, blood and cross, that gave them such power. And it was not only in battlefields that the Templars carried this reputation. They became the shock troops of every major Crusader army. Kings demanded their presence. Popes praised their bravery. Enemies cursed their name. Wherever the fighting was thickest, wherever the danger was greatest, the white cloaks of the Templars could be seen at the front. Still, their role was not just to win glory. Their sacrifice bought time, protected armies, and allowed weaker forces to escape. They were often ordered to hold the rear during retreats, a task as brutal as it was suicidal. Many Templars died this way, holding a pass or a gate until their brothers could flee to safety. In those final moments, surrounded and outnumbered, they fought with the same unyielding devotion, as if they commanded an entire army. Their enemies learned to respect them. Even Saladin, who executed captured Templars, spoke of their ferocity. He knew that when a white cloak appeared on the battlefield, he faced not only a knight, but a man who had already accepted death. Let us pause here. Picture a battlefield. At dusk, the air is thick with smoke and ash. The cries of the wounded echo across the field. Amid the bodies, a lone Templar kneels. His sword is broken. His cloak is torn and stained with blood. He bows his head in prayer, lips moving silently, even as enemies close in. He does not beg. He does not flee. He accepts. And in that acceptance he becomes what he was always meant to be, a warrior of the cross. This was the Templars' legacy. In battle, they were not just knights. They were not just monks. They were men who fused blood and cross into one, who charged without fear, who died without regret. Their courage became their weapon. Their faith became their shield. But with every charge, with every battle, something else was happening. As Their reputation grew, so too did their influence. Kings leaned on them. Popes trusted them. Donations poured in. And soon, the Templars were not only warriors, they were becoming landowners, bankers, and keepers of secrets. The battlefield was only half their story, because beyond the clash of swords, there was another power rising, the power of wealth. Mystery and fear. And in the next chapter, we will step away from the dust and blood of war to uncover that hidden side, the treasure of the temple. The whispers began in the dark. They spoke of vaults hidden beneath stone, of gold piled so high it dazzled the eye, of relics too holy to name, guarded by men who would rather die than reveal their secrets. They called it the treasure of the temple. Some said it was the wealth of kings. Others said it was the Ark of the Covenant itself. But one thing was certain. Wherever the Templars went, mystery followed. And soon their name became tied not only to blood on the battlefield, but to riches beyond imagination. Let's start with the truth. The Templars began as poor men, 9 knights, living in ruined quarters near the Temple of Solomon, so poor they were mocked for sharing horses. Their vows bound them to poverty, chastity, and obedience. They owned nothing personally, no houses, number families, no gold. Yet within a single century they became one of the richest organizations in the medieval world. How? That's the question that haunted Europe. The answer was not buried treasure, or magical relics at least, not at first. Their wealth came from something far more practical, trust. When the Church officially recognized the Templars, donations poured in. Kings and nobles gave them estates. Merchants donated coins. Farmers left them livestock in wills. To give to the Templars was to give to God. Their poverty meant the wealth could not be stolen by individual knights. It all went to the order. Soon the Templars owned farms, vineyards, mills, and even entire villages. The money from these lands flowed into their coffers, not for luxury, but for fueling war in the Holy Land. But that was only the beginning. The Templars became the world's first great bankers. Imagine this. A pilgrim in Paris wanted to travel to Jerusalem. Carrying gold that far was a death sentence. Bandits would strip him bare before he left Europe. So he went to a Templar house. There he deposited his money. In return he received a letter, marked with the Templar seal. He could travel empty-handed, safe from robbers. And when he arrived in the Holy Land, he presented the letter at a Templar fortress. His money was waiting for him. It was revolutionary. For the first time, men could move wealth across continents without touching a coin. The Templars became trusted bankers for nobles, kings, and even the Pope himself. They financed armies. They loaned money to monarchs. Their vaults became the beating heart of Christendom's economy. And yet people whispered, for their banking was secretive. Their vaults were guarded, their ledgers hidden. No one outside the order knew the true amount of their wealth. Rumors grew. Some said their treasure was infinite. Some said they found Solomon's gold beneath the temple itself. Others swore they guarded the Holy Grail. Now imagine walking into a Templar commandery. The smell of wax and parchment fills the air. Monks sit at long tables, scratching numbers. On to scrolls. Chests of coin clink as they're carried into underground vaults. Guards in white cloaks stand silent at the doors. Everything is precise. Everything is orderly. The discipline of battlefields extended into finance, but the true treasure of the temple wasn't just gold. It was power, the ability to fund wars, to shape kingdoms, to decide which king rose and which fell. Kings who owed money to the Templars were careful never to offend them. Popes relied on their funds to maintain armies and build cathedrals. Behind their vows of poverty, the knights controlled the purse strings of Europe. Still, the mysteries persisted. Travelers told tales of vast underground chambers in Jerusalem, filled with relics looted from ancient times. Some said the Templars dug beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple and found secrets lost for 1,000 years. The Ark, the Grail, scrolls of divine knowledge. None of it was ever proven, but the silence of the order only made the legends grow louder. Step into a medieval tavern. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of ale. Merchants whisper over mugs of beer. The Templars found the lost treasure of Solomon, one says. They worship a hidden relic, another insists. The stories spread across Europe like fire. The Templars never denied them. They never confirmed them. They simply rode on, their faces hidden under steel, their red cross glowing in the torchlight. That silence was their weapon. It made them untouchable, mysterious, more feared than even their swords. Yet their growing wealth and secrecy made enemies. Kings grew jealous. Lords whispered of corruption. Some priests feared their treasure was cursed. For while the Templars claimed their wealth served God, not all believed it. And jealousy is a dangerous seed. But for now the treasure of the temple remained secure. It built castles that seemed unbreakable, funded armies that shook the world, and gave the Templars a shadow of power even greater than crowns. Picture this. In the fortress of Paris, the Templars kept their treasury. Underground vaults stretched deep, guarded day and night. Inside were chests of coin, bars of silver, relics, donated by nobles. The sound of dripping water echoed in the stone halls. Torches burned low, casting flickering shadows on the walls. And in the silence one could almost feel the weight of history pressing down. This was no longer the order of 9 poor knights. This was a brotherhood that had become richer than kingdoms, a brotherhood whose treasure was spoken of in fear and awe, and yet the irony was bitter. Their vow of poverty had made them wealthier than they could have ever imagined. Their vow of silence had filled the world with rumor. Their vow of obedience tied them only to the Pope, making them untouchable by kings. But those same things, their wealth, their mystery, their independence, would one day turn the world against them, because treasure attracts eyes, treasure sparks greed, and in the centuries ahead, the Templars' treasure would become their curse. So let us leave them here, in their fortresses, their vaults heavy with coin, and their halls echoing with whispers. Outside, kings are watching. Popes are depending on them. Enemies are plotting, and rumors of holy relics swirl through every village and court. The treasure of the temple gave the knights power beyond the sword. But power always comes with a price. And in the next chapter, we will explore the darker side of their legend, the whispers of secret rites, forbidden knowledge, and hidden relics that made the world both revere and fear the Templars. This is the story of keepers of a hidden knowledge. The door closed with a dull thud, and the room went still. A single candle burned in the dark, its flame bending to a whisper of wind. A knight in a white cloak set a leather satchel on the table and untied the cords. Inside was no gold, no jewels, only folded parchment, a bone stylus, a seal of red wax, and a simple wooden cross. He looked around at the faces and the glow scribes, a chaplain, a commander, and he spoke in a low voice that carried like thunder. What they guarded tonight was worth more than any treasure. It was knowledge. It was a map to power. It was the heart of the temple that no enemy could touch with steel. Close your eyes and see it. Hear the scratch of quills. Smell hot wax, old leather, and dust rising from stone. Feel the cool air on your skin as the scriptorium breathes in silence. This is not a battlefield of lances and shields. This is another kind of war. A war of ideas, codes, secrets, and memory. The Knights Templar were famous for the sword, but what truly made them feared was the mind. They became keepers of a hidden knowledge, practical, spiritual, and whispered in a world that trusted steel more than ink. Let's start with the practical. Pilgrims needed to move money across oceans without being robbed. Kings needed to move armies without going broke. The Templars built a system to make that possible. A man in London could hand over coins and receive a marked letter. He could travel light, carrying only hope and paper. In the Holy Land he would speak his name, show the seal, and the order would honor it. The Templars kept ledgers, signs, and phrases known only to brothers. It was not magic, it was trust, wrapped in careful rules. But to a world of bandits and broken oaths, it felt like wizardry. Now picture a Templar clerk at dawn. He warms his hands over a brazier. He opens a leather ledger that smells of smoke and tallow. Lines of neat marks run down the page. Each mark is a promise. Each seal is a bond. There is no song here, no horn of battle, only discipline. Only the slow, steady work that lets people cross deserts and return home alive. This, too, was a kind of guardianship. Knowledge as shield. Knowledge as road. But the Order's hidden knowledge went further. It flowed through languages and lands. In the Holy Land, the brothers met scholars from many faiths. They shared wells. They traded for timber and grain. They hired local builders and learned local craft. They watched how arches rose and how stones fit so tight you could not slide a blade between them. They learned about wind and water and how a fortress breathes in a siege. They learned how a cistern keeps a city alive when the gates are shut and the fields are burning. Walk with me through a Templar workshop. The floor is gritty with sand. A mason lifts a wet block and listens to it settle. A carpenter runs his hand along a new beam that smells of resin. A young knight kneels to study a chalk line on the ground where a gatehouse will rise. Voices mix French, Arabic, Greek, the Latin of the church, and the rough tongues of soldiers, each word carrying a lesson. The knowledge in this room is not written on a single page. It moves from hand to hand, tool to tool, and stone to stone. There was spiritual knowledge, too. The brothers rose before dawn to pray in cold chapels lit by one candle. They learned the Psalms by heart. They listened to sermons that bound the sword to the soul. Knights were told to keep their eyes low, their words few, and their pride broken. They learned how to ride straight into fear by training their minds to be still. They were told the body would fail, the horse would fall, the blade would bend. But the vow must not break. This was not a library lesson. It was a way to survive. Now imagine a quiet night on the ramparts. Wind hums against the battlements. The world is ink black except for a silver moon on the sea. Two Templars stand shoulder to shoulder. Their cloaks snap in the gusts. One speaks so softly the words almost vanish. He tells the younger man a truth. That cannot be written in any rule. You must hold when others run. You must obey when your blood wants to rage. You must remember that courage without mercy is a curse, and mercy without courage is a lie. The young knight nods. He will never forget. That lesson will travel with him longer than any map. Of course, the rumors grew. People love a secret. They said the Templars dug under the Temple Mount and found chests from the Age of Kings. They said there were scrolls with names of angels, maps of lost tunnels, and instructions for relics that glowed in darkness. They whispered about the Holy Grail. They argued about a sacred lance and a mysterious head sealed in silver. Every tavern had a version. Every storyteller swore he knew a cousin who saw a chest that melted iron. The order said nothing. Silence was its own kind of light. In truth, the most dangerous knowledge they held was simple. It was the knowledge of who owed whom and how much. It was a list of debts kept in calm hands. It was the memory of favors given and received between kings and popes. It was the habit of writing everything and talking little. That is the kind of knowledge that can lift a man or break him. That is the kind of knowledge that makes friends useful and enemies careful. But hidden knowledge is heavy. It pulls at a man's life. It marks him in ways others cannot see. A Templar carried more than armor. He carried the weight of sealed letters and unspoken truths. He carried the respect of the poor who trusted him, and the suspicion of the powerful who feared him. He learned to walk between prayer and policy, between chapel and counting room, without losing his soul. Not all were strong enough. Some broke, some fell to pride. The order forgave, punished, or sent them away. The machine kept turning. Step into a crowded market at noon. Fruit glistens in the heat. Spices sting the air. Sellers shout in 10 accents. A Templar rides through, and all eyes catch the red cross. A merchant bows a little too low. A money changer watches with a guarded smile. A mother lifts her child to see. The knight is a symbol, but he is also a man. His face is tired. His beard is coarse with dust. He smells of leather and horse. He remembers names and numbers as he moves, then turns a corner and vanishes into the heat, leaving only the hush that follows a story as it passes. Now we are in the archive. A low, cool chamber, thick doors, stone shelves. Beeswax candles pant, with soft flames. Parchment after parchment lies rolled and tied, each one sealed. A brother lifts a scroll and reads in a steady voice. Land granted, rent owed, troops promised, grain measured. A note in the margin says, simply fulfilled. The words are dry, but the power is not. These are the bones of kingdoms, stacked quietly in the dark. A drop of wax falls and hardens. The smell is sweet and a little sad, like time itself, cooling on stone. But stories do not stay locked forever. When people cannot see what you keep, they guess. When they guess, they fear. And when they fear, they strike. Seeds of doubt began to sprout in courts and chancels. Are the Templars too rich? Do they know too much? Who can command men who answer only to the Pope? Who can face an army that keeps its own books and guards its own secrets? The order continued its work, but the air around it changed. The same silence that once made them holy now made them strange. Yet the brothers kept building. They used what they learned to raise fortresses where the wind itself became a wall. They sited wells where rain hid itself. They stacked towers so a handful of men could outlast a siege. They braided roads and supply lines into the land like veins. Their castles were not only stone, they were knowledge turned into shape, hidden thinking turned into heights and angles, water and light. A traveler could look up at those walls and feel both comfort and a chill. This is what knowledge looks like when it wears armor. Listen, a bell rings in a hilltop chapel. Hooves drum on a switchback road. A gate lifts with a groan. The courtyard wakes. Bakers pull loaves that smell like home. A smith's hammer beats like a heart. In a tower room, a brother finishes a letter and sets the seal. He breathes out and presses. The wax, somewhere far beyond the sea, that letter will open a door for a stranger he will never meet. That is the strange grace of hidden knowledge. It is quiet, and it saves lives you will never see. And yet the reckoning will come. Knowledge draws power. Power draws envy. Envy draws knives. The Templars are not there yet, not in this moment of order and candlelight. For now their minds are steady, their hands are sure, and their secrets are safe. But outside the walls, kings are counting, and rumor is turning into law. The road ahead bends. Still, before the storm breaks, there is one more shape their knowledge will take stone on stone, tower on tower, a world of walls and watchfires that will stand against time like the rib cage of the earth. We will walk those battlements next and feel the wind that taught the brothers where to build and how to endure. The horizon burned red at sunset. The desert wind howled across jagged hills, carrying dust and the smell of death. And there rising from the rock itself stood a fortress so massive, so unshakable, it seemed less like a castle and more like a mountain with walls. Torches flickered along its battlements. Watchtowers scanned the horizon, and at its gates knights in white cloaks with red crosses stood guard, silent and immovable. To enemies it was a nightmare. To pilgrims it was salvation. To history it was proof that the Knights Templar were more than warriors. They were builders of kingdoms. This is the story of Templar castles and the power they forged, stone by stone. Close your eyes and imagine the Holy Land in the 12th century. Armies marched across deserts. Raiders struck caravans on lonely roads. Cities rose and fell in tides of blood. To survive here was not a matter of courage alone, it was a matter of walls. The Templars understood this better than anyone. They built fortresses that were not only strongholds but lifelines guarding trade routes, protecting pilgrims, and anchoring Christian kingdoms in hostile lands. One of their greatest creations was Crac des Chevaliers in modern Syria. Stand before it in your mind. Its walls rise layer upon layer, a double ring of stone thicker than the width of a house. Towers loom like giants, their shadows crawling across the earth as the sun moves. Inside, echoing halls smell of smoke from 100 kitchens, while deep cisterns hold water cool as night. Soldiers drill in the courtyards, their armor clanging in rhythm. To lay siege to Krak was to fight against the earth itself. It was so impregnable that Muslim chroniclers called it the key of the kingdom. But Krak was only one jewel. The Templars scattered fortresses across the Holy Land like anchors on a stormy sea. Safed, perched high in the hills of Galilee where the wind howled like a chorus. Tortosa staring out at the blue Mediterranean, its towers catching the spray of salt. Chastel blank, its walls white in the sunlight, a beacon for miles. Each fortress was more than a military base. It was a sanctuary, a monastery, and a bank, where pilgrims could rest, where supplies were stored, and where gold was guarded behind unbreakable doors. Step inside one of these castles. The air is cool and damp. The walls are thick, so thick, that the outside world feels far away. Templars kneel in the chapel, their voices murmuring prayers that echo off stone. Down the corridor, kitchens roast meat over open flames, the smell drifting through vaulted halls. In the stables, horses snort and stamp, the sound of hooves echoing like thunder in the dark. And below, in hidden vaults, chests of coin rest, under lock and seal, guarded not just by men, but by silence. The genius of the Templar castles lay not only in their strength, but in their design. Their architects blended European and Middle Eastern styles, learning from the people they fought and the lands they lived in. Rounded towers deflected stones better than square ones. Sloped walls made it harder for enemies to scale. Hidden passages allowed knights to move unseen, striking where least expected. Wells and cisterns kept water flowing, even under siege. Every stone was placed with purpose. And when the horns of war sounded, these castles became crucibles of courage. Picture a siege. Arrows rained down, hissing like snakes. Stones hurled by catapults crash against the walls, shaking the earth. Smoke billows, the smell of pitch and fire filling the air. Outside, enemies shout prayers to their God. Inside, the Templars stand calm, their white cloaks stained with dust, their hands steady on the crossbars of the gates. For days, weeks, even years they hold. Many die, but none break, because within those walls lies not just stone, but a vow. But castles were more than defense. They were the skeleton of kingdoms. From them the Templars ruled land, collected rents, and administered justice. In some regions they were lords. In all but name, peasants worked their fields. Markets opened under their protection. Roads stretched from one fortress to another, linking villages into networks of power. The Templars had become not only guardians of pilgrims, but governors of people. Their white cloaks carried the weight of law as much as the weight of war. And across Europe, their power was just as strong. The order owned vast estates in France, Spain, England, and beyond. Each property fed into the same system: grain from French fields, wool from English sheep, wine from Spanish vineyards, all flowing into Templar coffers. The castles in the Holy Land were fed by the lifeblood of Europe itself. This made them more than castles. They were nodes in a web that stretched across continents. Still, nothing is eternal. The castles of the Templars, though mighty, faced enemies who never ceased. At Safe, the walls were thick, the towers high. But when the armies of Mamluks came in 1266, wave after wave crashed against its defenses. After a siege of weeks, the fortress fell. The survivors were executed there, blood soaking the stones. At Crac des Chevaliers, too, after centuries of defiance, the Templars were forced to surrender in 1271 to the great Sultan Baybars. Even mountains can be worn down, even walls can crumble, yet the memory of those castles lived on. Travelers spoke of their size with awe. Chroniclers wrote of their endurance with admiration. Even enemies remembered them as places of iron will, where men fought like lions caged in stone. Now imagine riding away from one of these fortresses after a long journey. The sun sets behind it, painting the towers in fire. The wind hums across the battlements, carrying the sound of bells ringing for evening prayer. Pilgrims rest in its shadow, safe for one night more, and on the highest tower a white cloak flutters in the wind, its red cross burning in the dying light. That was the gift of the Templar castles. They were more than stone. They were hope made solid, faith carved into the earth. They showed the world that the Templars were not just soldiers or bankers, but builders of kingdoms, men who could turn barren hills into strongholds of order, men whose vision stretched beyond battle into the very shape of the land. But stone is only as strong as the people who guard it. And when the tides of war shifted, when Jerusalem itself fell, when the roads to the Holy Land grew darker, the castles became lonely islands, cut off from the dream they had been built to serve. The walls stood, the towers held. But the kingdom they were meant to protect was slipping away, and in the next chapter we will witness that turning point, the moment the Holy Land itself was lost, and the Templars faced their greatest defeat. This is the story of the fall of Jerusalem. The air was thick with smoke, the streets ran red with blood. Bells that once rang for prayer now clanged in terror, and above the holy city black banners snapped in the hot wind. Jerusalem, the dream of knights, the prize of kings, the beating heart of the Crusades, was falling, and at its gates men in white cloaks with red crosses fought like lions in a cage. They knew they could not win. They knew the walls would break. Yet still they stood, swords in hand, fighting to the last breath. This was no ordinary battle. This was destiny shattering. This was the moment when the hope of Christendom cracked like stone beneath a hammer. This was the fall of Jerusalem. Let us step back. The year was 1187. The holy city had been in Christian hands for almost a century. Ever since the First Crusade carved its way through fire and blood to seize it in 1099. For decades, knights and pilgrims had walked its streets. Bells rang in its churches. The Temple of Solomon had become the Templars' headquarters. To the faithful of Europe, Jerusalem was not just a city. It was heaven on earth, the place where Christ had walked, suffered, and risen. But empires rise and empires fall. Across the deserts and mountains, a new power was rising. His name was Saladin, a warrior, a statesman, a man of vision. Patient, clever, and relentless, Saladin united the Muslim world under his banner. He was not just a general. He was a storm, gathering strength, and his eyes were fixed on Jerusalem. The clash came first at the Battle of Hattin. It was a blazing July day, the sun a furnace over the hills of Galilee. The Christian army marched without water, their throats dry, their skin burning. When Saladin's forces struck, it was like fire consuming dry grass. The Crusaders were surrounded. Their lines buckled. Their banners fell. and the Templars who charged again and again were cut down in droves. Those captured faced no mercy. Saladin ordered the execution of the Templars and Hospitallers, knowing these were warriors who would never bend to his cause. Their blood soaked the earth dot with the Crusader army broken. The road to Jerusalem lay open. Now imagine the city as the siege begins. The sun sets red, painting the golden dome of the rock and fire. Dust hangs in the air. The smell of fear is everywhere. Pilgrims pray in the churches. Women carry water to the walls. Children cry in the shadows. And above, the knights prepare. The Templars take their posts at the gates, their armor dented, their faces set. They know they are outnumbered. They know no help will come. Still they raise the Red Cross banner over the walls, daring Saladin's army to strike. The siege was brutal. Stones from catapults crashed into towers, shaking the ground like thunder. Arrows hissed through the sky, piercing flesh and wood. Alike, fires spread along the walls, smoke stinging eyes, choking lungs. The sound of drums echoed through the night as Saladin's men hammered at the gates. And yet the defenders fought on. Templars launched desperate charges through breaches, swords flashing in the dust. Every alley became a battlefield. Every rooftop a fortress, but courage could not change fate. The walls were too broken, the army too weak, the city too isolated. After days of savage resistance, the leaders of Jerusalem sought terms. They knew if the city fell by storm, it would be slaughter. Saladin, unlike the Crusaders of 1099, offered mercy. Christians could ransom their lives. Many fled their tears, falling on the stones as they looked back one last time at the Holy Sepulchre, knowing they would never see it again. For the Templars, however, there was no such mercy. They had no wealth to ransom. Their vow bound them to fight until the end. Many were executed. Others were enslaved. Their headquarters at the Temple of Solomon was taken, its halls echoing with silence where once prayers had risen like incense. The Red Cross was torn down. The dream was over. The news struck Europe like a thunderclap. Imagine a cold cathedral. In France, candles flicker. A priest reads a letter aloud, his voice trembling. Jerusalem has fallen. Gasps echo through the stone nave. Women weep, men fall silent. For them it was as if heaven itself had been stolen. The holiest city in Christendom was gone, and with it the very purpose of the Crusades seemed broken. Kings across Europe swore vengeance. The Third Crusade would follow, led by giants like Richard the Lionheart. Armies would march again. Battles would rage again. But Jerusalem would never truly return to Christian hands, not as it had been before. For the Templars the loss was devastating. Their home, their sacred charge, was gone. They had built castles, fought battles, guarded roads, all for Jerusalem. And now the city was lost. Yet they did not disband. They did not fade. Instead, they turned their strength outward. They fortified coastal cities. They rebuilt their networks. They became more than guardians of one city. They became defenders of Christendom itself, wherever the cross was threatened. Still, the wound of Jerusalem never healed. The stories of those who fell at its gates were told and retold. Pilgrims carried the memory home in tears. Chroniclers wrote of the bravery of the Templars who held until the last. Even their enemies respected them. Muslim writers praised their courage, calling them the fiercest of the Franks. The fall of Jerusalem burned itself into legend. Now stand with me at the gates of the holy city. The air is still, the stones are warm under the sun. The echoes of that siege linger in the silence. You can almost hear the clash of steel, the cries of the dying, the prayers whispered in desperation. The Templars are gone now, but their shadows remain, written into the walls themselves. The fall of Jerusalem was not just the end of a city, it was the turning of an age. It marked the shift from hope to survival, from conquest to defense. The Templars had lost their heart, but their story was far from over, for even as they mourned their greatest defeat, new enemies were already circling. Enemies not from deserts or battlefields, but from thrones and altars. Kings who coveted their wealth, priests who feared their power. Whispers of betrayal were beginning. And in the next chapter we will follow that shadow. We will see how jealousy, suspicion, and greed turned allies into foes, and how the guardians of the cross became hunted themselves. This is the story of enemies in the shadows. The Templars once stood unchallenged. Their castles rose like mountains. Their armies thundered across battlefields. Their treasure filled vaults across Europe. To pilgrims they were saviors. To kings they were guardians. To the Pope they were the very sword of God. But shadows grow behind every flame, and in those shadows whispers began to rise. Whispers of jealousy, whispers of greed, whispers of secrets too dark to be holy. Soon the Templars found themselves surrounded not by enemies on the battlefield, but by enemies in the shadows, waiting to strike from within the very world they had sworn to protect. Imagine a medieval throne room. The air smells of burning, torches and perfumed oil. A king sits restless on his chair of oak. His crown glitters, but his coffers are empty. War has drained him. Taxes weigh on his people. He turns his gaze toward the Templars. Their estates are vast. Their wealth is secure. Their vaults overflow with gold lent to lords and monarchs alike. A king clenches his jaw. They were supposed to be monks, poor, humble, devoted to God. How, then, had they grown richer than the very kings they served? This question poisoned many royal courts. The Templars' vow of poverty meant that no single knight owned anything. But the order itself, its farms, castles, lands, and banking networks was immense. When a king needed money, he borrowed from the temple. When a prince needed soldiers, he called the Templars. Soon, rulers across Europe realized something dangerous. The Red Cross Knights did not answer to them. They answered only to the Pope. To kings, this was a humiliation. They saw an army within their lands, loyal to no crown. They saw treasure they could not touch. They saw secrets kept behind locked vaults, and jealousy curdled into hatred. Step into a cathedral at night. Candles flicker in the cold air. The smell of incense drifts upward. A priest whispers to another, "The Templars are strange, too strange." He lists their sins in hushed tones. They eat in silence. They never laugh in public. Their ceremonies are closed to outsiders. Their initiation rites are secret. What happens in those halls? What words are spoken behind those doors? No one knows. And when no one knows, imagination does the rest. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed the Templars denied Christ in their oaths. Others said they spat on the cross. kissed forbidden idols, or worshipped a mysterious head hidden in their vaults. To ordinary villagers, these stories were terrifying. How could holy knights also be heretics? Could it be true? Or was it simply envy, sharpened into lies? The truth was far simpler. The Templars lived by a strict rule, one that demanded silence, discipline, and obedience. Their rituals, though plain, were hidden to preserve unity. But secrecy breeds suspicion, and in a world ruled by faith and fear, suspicion was as deadly as any blade. Now picture the streets of Paris. Rain slicks the cobblestones. Merchants close their shops. In the shadows, whispers pass from ear to ear. The Templars worship the devil, someone says. They drink blood in their rites, another insists. The smell of roasting chestnuts mixes with the sour tang of rumor. By the time dawn breaks, the whispers have grown into a storm, and at the center of that storm stood one man, King Philip IV of France. Philip was clever, ambitious, and deeply in debt to the Templars. He owed them more gold than he could ever repay. To him, the order was no longer a shield of Christendom. It was a chain around his crown, and chains in the mind of a king must be broken. Philip began to weave a net. He whispered to the Pope that the Templars were heretics, that their hidden rites mocked Christ, that their wealth corrupted their souls. He planted spies, he spread lies, he turned rumor into accusation and accusation into law. And as he worked, the shadow over the Templars grew darker. For the knights themselves, life carried on. They trained in their castles. They prayed in their chapels. They guarded roads and managed estates. Many had no idea the storm was gathering. They believed their greatest enemies still rode in the deserts of the East. They did not see that the deadliest foe now wore a crown and smiled across the banquet table. Imagine a Templar commander in France, sitting at dinner with his brothers. The fire crackles. The smell of bread and roasted meat fills the hall. He speaks of discipline, of loyalty, of their duty to Christendom. He does not know that even as he speaks, scribes in the king's court are drafting charges of blasphemy against him. He does not know that spies have written down his every habit, every prayer, every silence. His faith blinds him to the dagger, being drawn behind his back. Enemies in the shadows are more dangerous than enemies in the light. On the battlefield, you can see the arrow before it flies. You can raise a shield. You can strike back. But in the courts and chancels, the Templars had no defense. Their silence was twisted into secrecy. Their wealth was twisted into greed. Their vows were twisted into heresy. By the time the knights realized what was happening, it was already too late. Kings saw opportunity. Priests saw power. And the common people, fed by rumor, began to fear the very men who had once been their protectors. The Red Cross, once a symbol of salvation, was now a mark of suspicion. Step once more into the shadows. It is the early 1300s. In Paris, the king and his advisers sit around a table lit by torches. The smell of wax and smoke hangs heavy. Their plan is ready. Arrests, trials, torture, the destruction of the Templars. An order that had stood for 2 centuries, feared on battlefields and trusted by popes, is about to be struck down not by armies, but by lies. The knights have no idea. In their castles, they sleep. In their chapels, they pray. Outside, the footsteps of soldiers gather. Enemies in the shadows are moving into the light. The story of the Templars is shifting now. Their enemies are no longer raiders on desert roads or armies beneath their walls. Their enemies wear crowns, carry scepters, and sit on thrones. The betrayal is coming. The trials are coming. The fire is coming. And in the next chapter, we will watch it unfold, the dawn raid that shattered the Templars, the confessions dragged from them under torture, and the burning pyres that consumed their leaders. This is the story of the trial of fire. The knock came before dawn, heavy fists striking on iron doors. Torches flared in the darkness. Soldiers poured into the streets, boots echoing like thunder on stone. In castles and commanderies across France, men in white cloaks with red crosses woke to the sound of chains. They thought they were being called to battle. Instead, they were being dragged to judgment. It was Friday, October 13th, 1307, a date that would stain history forever. The day the Knights Templar, once the pride of Christendom, were betrayed not on the battlefield, but in their own halls. And what followed was not a trial of truth. It was a trial of fire. Close your eyes and picture it. The chill of autumn hangs in the air. The streets of Paris reek of damp hay and wood smoke. Templar knights, unarmed and unarmored, are bound in ropes marched through crowds that whisper and spit. Their cloaks are torn, their heads bowed. Some look confused, others furious, but none of them understand. They had shed their blood for Christendom, defended roads and castles, guarded pilgrims and kings. And now the same kings who once praised them brand them traitors and heretics. At the heart of this betrayal stood King Philip IV of France. He was cunning, ruthless, and drowning in debt to the Templars. Their treasure tempted him. Their independence enraged him, and so he struck first. He accused the Templars of heresy, of denying Christ, of worshipping idols, of spitting on the cross. Lies sharpened into weapons. Rumors became chains. The knights were hauled into dungeons. Imagine the stench: sweat, blood, mold, and rats scratching in the dark, shackles cut into wrists, straw rotted beneath them. Interrogators entered with questions already laced with answers. Do you deny Christ? Do you spit on the cross? Do you worship a devil in secret? Those who denied were beaten. Those who resisted were stretched on racks until joints cracked. Flames seared skin. Needles pierced flesh. Some knights, broken by agony, confessed to crimes they had never committed. Others died without a word, their silence heavier than any. Scream. Step into one of those chambers. A torch smolders in the damp air, its smoke curling toward the ceiling. A knight is bound to a frame of wood. His body shakes with pain as the rope tightens, bone grinding against bone. His lips bleed from biting down to stop himself from crying out. His interrogators lean closer. Confess, they whisper. Confess, and it will end. He looks up, his face pale in the flickering light, and whispers a prayer instead. The trial was never about truth. It was about destruction. King Philip wanted their wealth. He wanted their lands. He wanted their power erased, so no one could challenge him. The Pope at first resisted, shocked at the accusations. But Philip pressed harder, twisting politics like a knife. Soon, even the Church bowed. Papal bulls were issued. Across Europe, the order of the Templars was suspended. Their brothers were hunted, their commanderies seized, their names dragged. Through the mud, yet in the fire of betrayal, courage still burned. The most famous defiance came from their last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. Picture him now. An old man, white hair hanging loose around his face, chains clinking on his wrists. He stands before judges in Paris, their robes heavy, their faces cold. They accuse him of blasphemy. They demand he confess. For a moment he wavers torture, has broken many before him. But then his voice rises, steady and clear. I declare before heaven and earth that I am innocent. The order is innocent. We have served Christ faithfully. We have betrayed nothing. The hall erupts in shouts. Scribes scratch furiously. Guards tighten their grip on their weapons. But Molay does not flinch. He knows he has sealed his fate. The punishment was death. Now step into the square of Paris, March 1314. The Seine flows dark and cold nearby. The smell of smoke and pitch hangs heavy in the wind. A crowd gathers, their faces pale with both fear and fascination. In the center, 2 wooden stakes rise, piled with kindling. Jacques de Molay, chained to one, looks out at the people. His white cloak is gone. His body is frail, but his eyes burn with fire. The executioners light the pyres. Flames roar upward, crackling, devouring wood, licking at cloth and flesh. Smoke fills the air, bitter and choking. The crowd gasps as the Grand Master cries out, his voice carried above the roar. God knows who is wrong and who has sinned. Soon, before his throne, the truth shall be known. His words cut deeper than any blade. They echo across the square, across the years. And as the flames consume him, many believe a curse has been unleashed. And indeed, fate seemed to answer. Within a year, both Pope Clement V and King Philip IV were dead. Some said it was coincidence. Others swore it was divine judgment. But the legend of the Templars' curse grew, whispered from taverns to cathedrals, turning Jacques de Molay's final cry into a prophecy. The order was gone. Its lands seized, its brothers scattered or executed. The once mighty Templars who had guarded pilgrims, built castles, and charged into battle with fearless hearts, had been undone not by armies, but by shadows, by envy, by lies, by betrayal. Yet death is not the end of a legend. The flames that consumed the Templars did not destroy their memory. Instead, they lit a fire that still burns in the imagination of the world. People asked, what happened to their treasure? What knowledge did they carry to their graves? Did some brothers escape, carrying secrets into hidden lands? The mystery of the Templars only deepened after their fall. Picture it, a lone knight fleeing across a stormy sea, a chest bound in iron at his side, or a brother in plain clothes, blending into the crowd, carrying only a scroll hidden under his cloak. Were these fantasies or fragments of truth? No one knows. But in the silence left behind, stories filled the void. The Templars had been destroyed. But their legend was only beginning. So let us leave the smoke of Paris behind. The ashes of Jacques de Molay drift into the sky, carried by the wind. Kings may have claimed victory. Popes may have declared judgment. But the whispers of the Templars will never die. They live in every tale of hidden treasure, every rumor of secret brotherhoods, every shadow cast by firelight. Their order ended in flames, but their legacy endured in myth. And in the next chapter, we will follow that legacy into the centuries beyond the myths. the mysteries, the stories that refuse to fade. This is the story of the legend lives on. The smoke from the pyre did not stop at the river. It drifted over roofs and bells, over boats and bridges, and then it kept going across fields and forests, across borders and centuries until it settled in 1,000 stories told by firelight. Close your eyes and you can still hear it. Boots on wet cobblestone, chains clinking in the dark, a last voice rising over the roar of flames. God knows who is wrong and who has sinned. The fire went out that night, but the echo did not. Picture a tavern long after midnight. The room is cramped and warm, smelling of ale, wood smoke, and rain-soaked cloaks. A traveler leans in, lowers his voice, and says he met a man who once guarded a chest for the temple. Across the table, a sailor swears he saw a red cross carved into a cliff on a secret coast. A mason traces a symbol into spilled beer and wipes it away before anyone can name it. The door swings open, the wind hisses. Someone laughs too loudly to hide fear. The Templars are gone, they say, but the legend is not. It is everywhere and nowhere. It walks the night like a memory that refuses to sleep. Now step out into the morning. The air is sharp and clean. A road runs between hedges heavy with dew. On a milestone, scratched faint and stubborn, a cross remains. We pass cathedrals where stone angels watch from high ledges. We pass bridges old enough to remember hooves, not wheels. We pass castles where the guide says, "Some of this was Templar ground," and our footsteps grow quieter without meaning. 2. The world is full of places where the order has vanished, yet the feeling has not. A cool draught in a stairwell, a groove in a step worn by armored feet, a chapel where the light falls just so. Let's talk about what survived in flesh and law, not only in rumor. After the arrests and the burnings, some brothers slipped into other orders. Some gave up their mantles and went home to fields and families older than their years. In Portugal, a wise king saved something of the spirit by shaping the Order of Christ, a new name for old vows, a safer banner for dangerous times. Its red cross would ride the caravels west and south, across seas that maps still feared, turning a drowned horizon into a path. History is clever that way. When one door is barred, it builds another in the next wall. But the legend grew faster than the records. People said there was a treasure hidden beneath the Temple Mount. People said the Templars found scrolls written when kings still wore lions on their shields, and the temple still stood. People said the Holy Grail went into there, hands and then into the earth. On Fridays that fell on the 13th day, some swore the air felt strange, like a warning that remembered. Are these facts? Most are smoke and shadow, yet they have weight, because we want them to. The legend has power because it gives shape to questions we keep asking. Where does courage go when the battle ends? What becomes of vows when the world turns its back? Walk with me into a library, leather and dust, a window ticking with rain. On the table, a row of books, chronicles, romances, secret histories with too much gold on the spine. Medieval poets cast Templars as perfect knights. Modern writers turned them into guardians of codes and keys. Painters gave them halos of sun. Filmmakers wrapped them in thunder and violins. Each age made them into the story it needed. Iron saints, tragic martyrs, keepers of riddles, ghosts with red crosses that glow in the dark. None of it is the whole truth. All of it is part of why the legend refuses to fade. Listen for it in cathedrals. A choir lifts a note that sounds like armor moving. A candle gutters in a draught and startles you for no reason. In a side chapel, a worn effigy lies with hands folded on a stone sword. The name is half broken. The date is a guess. The face is gentle. You do not know this knight, but you know what he believed. That duty is a road you keep walking, even when it hurts. That is the quiet core of the story. You can strip away the treasure and the whispers and the clever codes, and you will still find a vow that did not want to bend. And there is another echo less romantic, more real. The Templars helped invent trust at a distance. Letters instead of coins, seals instead of blades, tallies that crossed seas while pockets stayed empty. Today a password opens a door you cannot see. A number moves across the world without weight. That is not magic. It is the long shadow of an old idea. Safety for the traveler, certainty for the unknown road. If you have ever handed your value to a symbol and asked the world to honor it, you have walked a path they helped lay. Not all lessons are pride. Some are warning. The order's fall teaches how power gathers envy. How silence can look like guilt when fear wants a face. How a lie, repeated with a crown behind it, can crush a truth that has no one left to shout. When we tell the Templar story, we say betrayal like a drumbeat. We should also say beware. Beware the storm that starts as a whisper. Beware the bargain that costs your name. Beware the comfort of forgetting your own rules when they hurt. The legend lives because it is not only about them, it is about us. Come to a ruined commandery at dusk. Grass whispers through the cracks. A tower lifts its black mouth to the first stars. Owls trade questions with fields. Your hands touch the stone and come away chalked with age. You imagine hooves at the gate, a bell in the yard, bread pulled from an oven, the clang of a smith shaping a promise into a nail. Then you hear nothing but your own breath, and you know you're standing inside a gap the world never closed. Legends love those gaps. They climb in, light a candle, and wait. People will always argue about secrets. Some swear the order fed hidden roots of later brotherhoods. Some draw lines from red crosses to square and compass and back again. Some see patterns in marks cut into arched stones, like a language left for anyone patient enough to learn it. Maybe there are threads. Maybe there are none. The truth is not hurt by questions, and the legend is not fed by answers. It survives because it is useful. A mirror we hold up when we talk about loyalty and fear, wealth and faith, law and mercy. Now stand on a cliff where the sea hammers the rocks. Salt hits your lips. Gulls wheel and cry like lost horns. Far below, a cave bites into the cliff, and inside it a pool goes deep and black. Someone once told a story about this place. A boat, under stars, a chest wrapped in iron, a knight who never told what he carried. You smile because you know the story is probably only a story, and yet you keep looking into the dark water, waiting for a shape to rise. That is the spell the legend still casts. It makes us look again. It keeps us curious. It keeps us awake. What, then, is the Templar legacy? Men who rode toward danger when others ran. builders who turned prayer into stone, clerks who made trust travel faster than fear, soldiers who paid for their vows in blood, a brotherhood that could not outlive the envy it inspired, and a name that grew larger after death, like a fire that dies down and leaves the night glowing anyway. If you listen closely, you can hear them even now on the long road, the jingle of bit and buckle, the soft thunder of hooves, the breath of horses in cold dawn. You can see white cloaks lifting in the wind, red crosses bright as wounds and wounds bright as signs. You can feel the choice they carried every day, to be the wall for someone weaker, to say, I will stand here and mean it. The world still needs that choice. Maybe that is why the legend will not die. We end where we began, with a city, a vow, and a question. What do we guard when no one is watching? What do we keep when keeping it breaks us? The Templars answered with their lives. We answer with our own small daily things. The scale is different. The weight is the same. And this is where our chapter closes, but not the journey. Because legends invite proof, and proof loves footprints. In the next chapter, we will leave the stories by the fire and step into the field, relics, ruins, and roads you can walk today. We'll follow the Templar trail from crumbling fortresses to quiet chapels, from carved symbols to archives that still smell of wax, so you can see with your own eyes how the legend lives on in stone.